Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am really delighted to introduce today's guest, Rashmir Balasubramaniam. Rashmir is a transformational leadership coach and thought partner to social innovators, philanthropists, and changemakers. She helps leaders and their teams level up their leadership and align their work with their unique purpose and capabilities so that they can realize greater impact, authenticity, joy, and flow. She's been on most sides of the table, having worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in a strategic and programmatic function. She's been a nonprofit leader and consultant, served as a trustee, worked in the private sector, and started her own social enterprise in 2004 to address the brain drain in nursing by harnessing the global movement of nurses combined with a modular educational and certification approach. She also offers 30 years of experience working across industries from investment banking to global health and development across countries such as East Africa, India, the US, and the UK, where she lives now. Rashmir has a demonstrated ability to build trust with diverse cultural and multidisciplinary groups and enables them to achieve a higher level of performance, impact, and creative flow. In addition, she has an MBA from Yale and numerous qualifications in business, international development, and coaching, and a long-time meditation and mindfulness practice. She loves helping others find and bring a contemplative edge to their lives and work so that they can make the difference they are here to make, living a more fulfilling and joyful life. Well, sign me up. I'm all for it. Rashmir, welcome. Thank you for being here on Work from the Inside Out.
Thanks so much for having me, Tammy. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, and thank you for joining us from your home office in Cornwall, England. It's delightful to have you here. So, as you know, on Work from the Inside Out, we love to begin at the beginning, Rashmir. So take us back to those formative years and tell us how they may or may not have informed where you are today. You've been to so many places.
Yes, I've done a lot of different things over the years. I mean, I am actually going to take you right back to one of my earliest memories, Tammy. It was a memory of me speaking to my father, and I don't remember how old I was, but very young, certainly less than 7. And I remember asking him, why am I here?
Oh.
And he laughed. I didn't understand it at the time, but he laughed because he couldn't answer the question.
He did or didn't? He didn't?
Well, he couldn't. He didn't know how, right? He didn't have an answer. And so his answer was a laugh. But I share this because it illustrates to me, 2 things. One, from a very early age, I knew I was here for a reason. I just didn't know what that reason was. And of course, my father would be the person that I would naturally turn to ask that question.
Yeah.
But the second thing is, how sensitive we are when we're small children and we don't understand the world around us. And I think his laugh I interpreted in a way that made me think, oh, it's not okay to ask that question.
Oh.
Maybe there's something here that I don't understand. And so part of me, even then, began to shut down to what that purpose, to what that reason, that calling. And so I share that because in many ways, one of the things that I had been seeking for most of my early career, up until about 10 or 15 years ago, was that reason, was trying to find that, but also trying to do it in a way, sort of navigating through more traditional expectations.
Yeah, I think a lot of people could relate to what you're speaking to in terms of taking fairly traditional linear paths to where they think they're going to find the thing that gives them that sense of success or accomplishment, and yet, always on that search. That's really, but I love the way you started with that. Why am I here?
I know. I mean, how at whatever it was, 5 or 6 or 7, But I think that goes to show for those of us that have that deep sense of calling, it's there from the
Yes.
beginning. We may not
Yes.
have the language for it, we may not know how to find it, but
Yeah.
it's there. And then I would also share, so I'm Sri Lankan ethnically, although I've grown up partially in Africa, partially in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
The classic joke, I'm sure you've heard this from other South Asians, but there are 4 things you're supposed to become: a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant, or an engineer.
That's
right?
I definitely, yes, I've heard that a lot. And a lot of people have become those things only to find they wanted something else.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So I think it couples with this unspoken sense early in many of our lives that you should go
Mhm.
down these paths and not explore other things. Now, that's obviously changed. The world is very different now with the internet and everyone's exposure to multiple possibilities. But when I was growing up, yeah, those seemed like the options. And my mother was a doctor, her father was a doctor. So becoming medicine was highly expected of my brother and I.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and we both rejected it. I mean, I did everything that I could to position myself to be able to do it.
Oh, you did? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I all the right A levels and the kind of school qualifications you do in the UK. I had all the sciences, letting go of things like Latin and English, which I would have quite liked to have studied, but because in the UK you have to narrow very, very early.
Oh,
And so
really?
you have to make these choices much earlier than in the US, where you get to,
Oh, well, the
you know,
US, it's like,
exactly, which I would have loved. Because you get such a wide exposure to subjects,
yeah.
but the thing that actually finally put me off medicine was I actually went to visit a medical school in the UK as I was thinking about applying to university. We were given a tour by current medical students at the school, and they took us down into the dissection lab. They are
Ooh.
not supposed to. Apparently, they were being cheeky med students, thinking, oh,
Oh,
let's freak these students out, give them a taste of what's really to come. And here's the interesting thing about that experience for me: going down there and seeing a partially dissected body didn't shock me from a sense of gore perspective. But I knew in my bones, I did not have the language for this at this age because I would have been 17 or 18 at the time. But something in me said, this is not the path for you. That there's a lack of respect here for the human body, for the wholeness of the being. And so,
yes.
again, I did not have that language at that age, right? This is me making sense of it subsequently. But
Right.
instinctively, I knew,
Yes.
no, not the
Yeah.
path for me right now.
Yeah. To even be able to reflect on that and understand that it wasn't just going, it was at a much deeper human level that you were having a response to that versus a reaction in that moment.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I would say it's sort of at the level of knowing, which is more of a whole
Yes.
embodied experience,
Yeah.
which is why I knew it, but I
Yeah.
couldn't have articulated it in those terms. But that
Yeah.
knowing is something, as I've been able to become more conscious of it, has really
Yeah.
served, right, for making decisions about something as simple as where to live or
Yeah.
or which job or career opportunity to take next.
That's why we call this work from the inside out.
The
It's
inside out.
exactly, it's all about that knowing that you can't always articulate, but it definitely informs you to follow something that's going to be the right decision for you, at least at that time, right?
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
what an amazing memory to have. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how you could erase that.
Yeah, I
Incredible.
don't think you can. Yeah, it's in your bones, isn't it?
So you returned home from that visit to the medical school. Were you able to convey that thought or that feeling to your mother? Or?
No, I don't think I even tried, in
Okay.
all honesty. But I was clear on the no, and so I just said, "Yeah, no, this is not for me." And there and then begins the search of, "Oh my goodness, okay, what else am I going to do
Ah, I
now?"
see. Oh, I'm curious though. What profession was your dad in?
Well, it's funny that you ask because so he was an accountant by training,
Okay.
and he had gone into management and leadership. But in terms of how we talked about his profession at that point, this was back in the 80s, and we didn't talk about leaders and managers in the way that we're having
No. Oh, no,
about
no, no.
so the natural thing was to think about, I wasn't thinking about accounting actually, I was actually thinking about my dad's background. So he had done a mathematics degree, he was studying, and my A levels, which were sciences, maths, physics, and chemistry. And the maths was weirdly easy for me. So I thought he did maths, talked to him about that, figured you can't really go wrong with a mathematics degree because you
Right.
still, especially in the UK, your undergraduate degree really it almost doesn't matter what it is. It opens a
Mhm.
lot of doors,
Yeah.
just a degree from a good university. And so chose maths thinking it would make a lot of sense. Logically, you still get a lot of really great training. And then I thought, I don't want to be a Luddite because tech was back in the 80s was you could see it was beginning to be something you needed
Yeah.
to pay attention to. And I thought,
Right.
I need to understand what this is about. And so I decided to actually do a joint degree, mathematics and computer science, and applied to a few different places to do that. And in part because the math was easy, in part because I thought this computer science thing was something I really ought to know about. You can see from what I'm sharing, like a lot of my choices at this point, and for probably another couple of decades, were very logical. Right. It
Yes.
was very much two things were going on. It's let me think through how do I do two things. How do I keep growing my skill set on the one hand and understanding and knowledge, etc. On the other hand, how do I keep my options open so that I
Yeah.
can stay open to what those other possibilities might be
Mm.
in time and I don't have to make that decision right this second. For the two factors that inform that choice and actually continued to for some time after that as well.
I wonder also your version of logic at that time. If you were articulating in your mind, I know this is not what I'm meant to do down the road. So I need to keep my options open, but this is what's going to meet my needs for now, kind of thing. I'm guessing somewhere deep inside you knew that, but at the moment you were, well, I'm supposed to go to school and I'm supposed to expand my skill set and get steady employment. And while this isn't medicine, it still checks off enough of the boxes. It's
Oh,
curious. Clearly, you had this inner knowing, but the inner knowing doesn't always meet the external actions. And yet you were
right.
preparing yourself for that in some ways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I was always a very reflective and thoughtful person, even as quite a young child,
Yeah.
for a variety of reasons, you know, background experiences, boarding school experiences, a whole bunch of things.
Mm.
So huge reflector and thinker, and so I think the university choice. There was also one other component that I should probably share. I also wanted to get space from family and parents, so I wanted to
Yeah.
go far away within the
Ah,
UK. So that was another factor. So, you know,
you
you look
mean
at a lot of the places that I
in,
applied.
oh, you mean for university?
Yes, far away from home. I'm hugely independent. I mean, I think this is one of the gifts of boarding school and perhaps a curse of boarding school as well, depending on your perspective. I
Yeah.
probably became overly independent because you learn very early to rely on yourself and
Yeah.
not rely on others. And
Right.
so going from boarding school to day school and being back at home was quite a shock to the system. So, you know, I was
Ah,
ready to like, okay, I need my freedom, I need my space. And so
yeah.
that was the third factor in the undergraduate choice. But in terms of the question you were asking about the clarity of the thinking, I would say the clarity probably came as I was making that choice from university into my first professional job,
Ah, okay.
because that's where same logic, but now I was super clear. Yeah, I really wanted something that would continue to keep my options open, but also give me valuable experience, keep
Yeah.
building skills, and open up a sense of possibility.
Yeah.
And so my first job out of college was into using chartered accounting. So I worked with Ernst Young here in London. It's one of those professions in the UK that's huge. There's a few things, accounting included, that a lot of graduates go into.
Yeah.
You get a fantastic training, exposure to business, financial background, and understanding, and you come out with an additional qualification that sets you up for all sorts of things.
Right.
But a lot of people that go into that don't stay in that. So I was thinking, great opportunity, great exposure, but it also having that job and coming from a relatively conservative background where the expectations on you and on success and the pathway you're supposed to follow are quite high. It also then gave me the freedom to negotiate a year off, right? I was basically to say, I'm having a year off and
Ah,
I've got a job to come back to. All good. I'm going to go and do some other things. And so there was a lot of thinking and navigating complexity, if you like, from a young age while continuing to position myself for the future. I went off and did a couple of things. I went and taught at a school in India for 5 months and then traveled for a month And that was kind of fun because I ran into visa issues in India. And so I ended up doing an economics A level while I was teaching in order to stay in India, which was really fun. So I did this A level in 1 month, which normally takes 2 years, right?
Whoa.
It was really, I mean, I was just having fun to some extent. And I loved travel. I loved it, meeting new people. I loved exploring places. This is despite being quite an introvert in some ways. And then after that, I went and spent about 3 months in Sri Lanka. So again, I'm Sri Lankan ethnically, but
Right.
3 months is the longest I'd spent in Sri Lanka at that point. And I stayed with some family friends, did some volunteering
Nice.
there with a couple of places, including the Red Cross. And then also did a bit of volunteering in France. So I was it was a year off, but I was doing a bunch of, voluntary stuff and a little
Well,
bit of.
a year off is still a year away from studies, and it's a different kind of learning experience.
And here's an interesting thing, speaking about career transitions and also these early clues, because there are often clues that we don't pay attention to because we're not tuning into them, right? We're looking elsewhere, and we're not guided in the ways that allow us to listen for those clues and know how to interpret them.
Yeah.
But I absolutely loved teaching, and I've
Ah.
realized I'm an innate teacher and coach. And if I'd realized that, it might have actually changed some of my choices. And it's funny because even at Ernst Young, I found myself doing some workshops and training for others.
Oh.
Of course, even though that wasn't my job, looking back, I can see how enlivening that kind of work was for me.
Mm-hmm. And was there a point at Ernst Young when you elevated and had direct reports, which would give you an opportunity to coach?
I would do that very naturally for younger trainees that were coming on board.
Sure.
But I actually left Ernst Young shortly after I qualified. And the reason for that is, clearly there's a part of me that doesn't like getting locked in anywhere. But also, I have a strong desire to keep learning and growing. That's one of my primary values, if you like.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my decisions were to continue the learning and growth, but also keep my options open and explore new things. So I went from Ernst Young into investment banking. Now, here it is interesting because at this junction point, I did try to make a switch into something that I thought would lead to a more meaningful career for me, a more mission impact oriented career, because I wanted to go into what was called project finance. This is the finance for big infrastructure projects, dams, roadways, kinds of things. But this was just before the Asian financial crisis. No one was hiring because there was no money in that space. But one of the banks I interviewed with said, why don't you join our corporate finance team? And inside I was saying, well, I don't exactly know what they mean by that, corporate finance, but sure, let me talk to them and find out. Anyway, this led me down a path where I ended up working for a different bank actually, but in mergers and acquisitions for a couple of years. And this, I have to tell you, was an amazing experience because I was surrounded by phenomenally smart people in an environment that really supported you to do your best work for the bank, obviously.
Wow, right.
And that was a really powerful experience because it was another level up from anything I'd experienced before. And that's always stayed with me. The challenge was when I stopped learning. I was reading The Guardian at the weekends and reading the Financial Times during the week and feeling like I couldn't really talk to my colleagues about this. And there was such interesting things I wanted to talk about and explore.
Yeah.
But that, were different in these two newspapers. So my social conscience was really starting to come to the fore. I reached a point, again, the bank tried to lock us in for 2 years because they were about to be bought by a bigger bank, which they were denying, how it goes.
Yeah.
But I knew it's now or never because I don't want to be locked in for 2 years. And I was aware that the longer you stay in investment banking, the more addicted you get to the money and the lifestyle and the harder it is to get out. As you can tell from my comment about The Guardian versus the Financial Times, I was feeling too far from mission. The combination of all of these things just told me it's time. I have to get out and I have to make the shift.
Yeah.
And I should say one thing I forgot in the story is when I went to Ernst Young, I had a sense that my career path was likely to be work till you're very senior in the private sector and then switch across to the nonprofit sector, which I'm sure you and others can identify with as well.
Sure.
But that experience that I had, particularly in investment banking, made me realize I don't want to wait. I need to be doing stuff that's much more meaningful and purpose oriented and impact oriented. And so, I stepped out.
Yeah. But you also positioned yourself where you could make these kinds of choices. I would imagine that you were smart with your resources to be able to put yourself in that position. You had amazing experience up to that point. So what did you do from there?
So I took what's called gardening leave, where you essentially have 3 months paid, right? But you're not working because they don't want you to be exposed to confidential information, especially if they think you're going to go join another bank. So it was fantastic. I had 3 months to reflect, to recuperate. And that's something, by the way, I highly recommend people do, is take proper time off between jobs if you can afford to do so.
Yeah.
As you know, so valuable. And so for me, I use that time, once I'd sort of taken a bit of a break, to try to figure out, what is the nonprofit sector? What's going on in it? Where do I want to be in it? How do I get a job in it? And, Tammy, it was a very interesting time, because what I quickly realized is how not just the sectors are different, but the different assumptions they make about each other.
Oh, yeah.
So people didn't know what to make of my background. They assumed I was going to be this really arrogant banker, finance type that didn't know the first thing about social impact or nonprofits. And I understand where that comes from. But they also didn't know where to slot me. Now, the world's evolved a lot since then. So there's more people from finance that have gone into the social sector and vice versa. But at the time, it was really difficult. Eventually, I thought, this is kind of ridiculous. I know I can make a difference. And of course, I've got a ton to learn. So I'm not going to go in and assume I know everything, because I don't.
Right.
But let me take a risk and just take an opportunity, whether or not it feels like it's at the right level. So I ended up taking a finance job, which was really interesting exposure for me, because I learned a lot through that experience. There's such limited finances often in these organizations, and we were coming to the end of the USAID grants that they had been working on. And so the manager of one of the two projects that I was the finance officer for resigned, and they didn't want to hire anyone else. So I ended up doing her job and my job at the same time for a single salary, right? Yeah. Working investment banking hours in this nonprofit. It's classic. You're smiling because I know you've been there.
Well, not only that, I see that going on even in the private sector now. I see companies going through rifts and people taking on the job of somebody else and doing two jobs in one and not being compensated. And there's a lot of that going on.
There is a lot of that, and it leads to burnout, or it can do.
Oh, terrible, but it's happening.
So for me, at this stage, I was still in my 20s. It was a wonderful opportunity, but it's not sustainable for people at this time. Through that experience, I was witnessing what was really important to see, which was a dearth of leadership and management capacity within the nonprofit sector.
Yes.
And it's not, and you and I have talked about this before, it's not that there's a lack of potential, there is, but there's a lack of investment. And seeing a number of talented young people coming into the organization and being disaffected, turned away and turned off, really had a big impact on me. That and the poor management across regions and countries. And those kinds of things really struck me. And I thought, I don't want to be part of this problem.
Right.
And so I actually, again, made a very intentional choice and said, I'm going to do an MBA, and hopefully that MBA will set me up to be a better leader and manager. So I went to the States to do an MBA and thought, again, great exposure to a different country, different place. Who knows what possibilities will happen? But at that point, my thinking was, I'll do this and then get the hell out of America. I was a little bit of an arrogant Brit. I had a very one-dimensional view of America and Americans. And what I realized very quickly being there is that America was actually really complicated. There are a couple of things about it that changed me. One is, being a South Asian woman living in the UK, I'd experienced a certain degree of prejudice and racism, and you grow up with that. One of the messages I think I got very early in life was, you're never fully going to be able to succeed as a brown woman in a wetland. And so that has definitely colored some of my ways of showing up, perhaps, and sort of the inner work that I've had to do over the years.
Yeah.
But going to America was interesting because I was confronted with the reality of America. I was in a place where you've got a very stark divide between town and gown. So the university was very white, upper middle class, privileged, wealthy, etc. The town, more complicated.
Oh, yeah.
So it hit me in the face, and nobody was talking about race. Interestingly, my summer of my MBA, I actually spent in South Africa, where everybody was talking about race. Every color of every socioeconomic strata. So the contrast was incredibly powerful. Coupled with that, I also experienced as a brown woman in America with an English accent, not being treated the same as I was in the UK. So suddenly I felt a degree of freedom to just be myself without the restrictions of racism as a brown Asian woman. Now, I know the Black experience is completely different, but for me, it was quite liberating to be in America compared to my experience in the UK. There's so much that's possible, and there are stark inequities and dichotomies everywhere in the world that if I can figure out how, I could potentially apply myself to and make a difference in. So I think what America did is it opened me up and freed me in certain ways, but it also softened me because at business school, I had a relationship with someone who I think really helped me see the world a little differently. And that was quite powerful.
And the contrast with going to South Africa, what an amazing experience to have that layered over your sense of self and what was possible for you. And to then be able to take that back eventually to the UK and how that impacted what you thought was possible for you versus what you thought earlier. So anyway, take us forward, because I know you did a lot of really other very interesting things along the way.
I did. And I was thinking, I had forgotten to say, one of the reasons I chose Yale for the MBA is because I didn't intend to stay in the States. I actually wanted to do an MBA somewhere with a global brand. So this might be interesting for the folks that are listening, thinking about grad school and that kind of thing. The global brand that was globally recognized was important to me because I knew I wanted to do something making a difference somewhere in the world. The Yale brand, likewise, a number of the other big brands around the world carry weight. Business school there is a little different. It's a little bit more about developing leaders for business and society, organizational behavior history. So there was thoughtfulness in these decisions with a view to what next. So a lot of people go to business school because they want to switch careers to get into something like investment banking or management consulting. I've done all of that. So for me, I was really wanting to do something different. There weren't a lot of interesting opportunities readily available for people that wanted to make a difference in some sort of interesting and different way.
Right.
And I got really intrigued by the ideas that somebody that I met while I was at Yale had about addressing the brain drain in global nursing. And so a really interesting topic. So potential for huge social impact if you can figure out how.
Absolutely.
But also he was looking at bringing together a few different, this is classic entrepreneurship, where you get different ideas from different places and name them. And he had a few ideas that he brought together. So there was an educational piece, a trade piece, and how do we harness the movement of trade to the investment in nursing schools around the world? So we're increasing the capacity, the supply of nurses, but also then managing the trade in a way that brings skills and money, et cetera, back into the countries. Really exciting stuff, as you can tell. I thought, well, this is the most exciting thing I've stumbled across and definitely want to give it a go. So I joined him and we set up a nonprofit, but really it was kind of the first social enterprise. It was early in the days of social enterprise, but that's what we were trying to do, was create a social enterprise that would fund itself through the work that we did, but advance thinking and solutions on this particular topic. And it was the first time I'd ever done anything entrepreneurial. And what I learned through that experience is there's an entrepreneur in me. Like I get really excited about those kinds of projects because they're bold, they're creative, they're entrepreneurial. You got to figure out how to solve these tricky solutions.
Right.
So much fun. I went in, thankfully, with my eyes open. I went in knowing it was a huge risk, that I had some significant concerns about the person I was joining. Because I did that, it was easier to walk away. Things, for various reasons, fell apart.
I see.
We had some very early successes, and it's very interesting. When you have early successes, particularly as money starts to come in the door, it's very interesting to see how people shift and change. I realized I had to walk away because I couldn't leverage my relationships. It didn't feel like the integrity was there for creating change in the world. So I'm walking away, but I learned so much and I got the entrepreneurial bug, and that's come back. I'm more entrepreneurial again now because that experience really opened my eyes to this whole world of entrepreneurship and innovation. And again, just to be able to see concrete successes within a few months of getting up and running was amazing. I mean, it really broke my heart to walk away. I have no regrets about the experience because I learned so much. And I learned
lot about business relationships as well through the process, right? And how to protect yourself when you're entering into these uncertain environments with people you don't necessarily know very well.
Right. Well, there's something else there too, I think, because it was clear that there was something there that wasn't aligning with your core values. You were very grounded in the decision you had to make, as difficult as it was, right?
Yeah.
And the other piece of that is that we really have to trust our instincts that we're making the right decision to look in another direction or step away from something to open up the door for the next thing. Sometimes we have to let go before we can even figure out what's next.
That's so well said, Tammy. Yeah, sometimes we do have to let go to figure out. And certainly in that instance, I needed to do that. And it's interesting you mentioned that because it is a lesson I've come back to a few times. As I've learned over the years more about myself, my core talents, but also what I'm best at and when I'm most useful. Like, I'm a great initiator, and I've had to learn there comes a point where I need to let go and somebody else needs to take over to take this to the next level. And that's been a hard lesson because it's very hard to let go of something that you've created.
Yes.
So it's powerful that you articulate it that way.
That's interesting. So you wrapped that up, so to speak. And where did you go from there?
So at this point, post business school, I was financially in a panic, thinking, oh, yikes, I've got business school debt. I've just spent 6 months on this startup with financially very little to show for it. I've got to get a job fast. So my plan was to revert to my original pre-business school plan, which get out of America and go work in Africa. And so I started looking for jobs in the nonprofit NGO sector in Africa. But a cousin of mine based in DC introduced me to a woman working at a think tank in DC. I still remember this because I went into this conversation knowing that she was in a think tank, and I was very clear that I didn't want to do research. And I literally was very upfront with her. And said, just to be clear, I'm really excited to talk to you about your work and your experience in the world, but I don't want to do research. And I could see her face kind of gave away that, oh, that was disappointing. She wanted to talk to me about research. What it did was it opened the door to a very candid conversation about what did excite me and what kinds of things would be interesting. And that was so powerful because she said, I think I know the perfect place. And she put me in touch with somebody at the Gates Foundation who was basically hiring a small team to look at new areas of giving for the foundation. And so my candor, I think, was a part of her making that connection, along with the things that I had done, including that entrepreneurial experience that I just had, because Gates is a place where they like people that think differently, innovatively, and think big. So there was flow there, even though I couldn't necessarily see it at the time.
So what exactly was the team doing?
And they were looking at new areas of giving to the Gates Foundation. So at this point, when I joined, the foundation was primarily in US programs, predominantly libraries, but a few other things, education as well. And also they had global health work.
Right.
And essentially Bill and Melinda at that time were thinking about where else can we make a difference? What else should we think about giving in? And so that team, and there were about 5 or 6 of us that were part of that team, were looking at a few different areas of giving, from water and sanitation, financial services for the poor, agriculture, and a few other areas as well. Some we dismissed quite quickly, but others actually grew into what is now the Global Development Program. And
I see.
A huge area of giving for the Gates Foundation. So you can imagine for someone like me, it was so much fun to be in this team where you're thinking about strategy, philanthropy, how do you make the biggest difference in the world given the resources? How do you also, do that in a way that are aligned with the philanthropist's vision and strengths and interests? And I was very interested in bringing in more systemic thinking and perspectives that at that time weren't usually getting heard in technology-oriented philanthropy or philanthropy by the Western world. So, because I brought in this other perspective of having lived and worked in many different countries, being Sri Lankan, having seen inequity from day one in my childhood, So it was again a little bit like my investment banking work, Tammy. I was in this place at that time where you felt, wow, you are surrounded by incredibly smart, thoughtful, compassionate people that just want to make a difference. And you have a whole organization that's designed to support you in making that difference.
Yeah.
And it was phenomenal. I often compare my early years at the Gates Foundation with my investment banking experience for that.
I love the fact that you could see the unique perspective you could bring to this team. So how long were you with Gates?
So I was there for 5 years. It was an incredible experience. I loved living in Seattle as well. Really a wonderful place.
I'm curious, what was the decision point for you to leave Seattle or leave Gates, whatever you want to share with us?
There are a couple of reasons. One is the Gates Foundation grew very fast. And I was really lucky to have joined at a time when it was pretty small because it was a really unique experience. The people that were there at that time, still look back fondly on those times. But with rapid growth, as again, from your experience, rapid growth brings all kinds of challenges around people management, organizational development, etc. What I learned about myself in that process is I don't do well in bureaucracy.
Yeah.
So the bigger it got, the more I was struggling with the bureaucracy and internal politics. And it was a useful learning experience because I had to learn, and I probably learned after I left, how to navigate some of those challenges and constraints. But I ran into basically some tricky dynamics that I could not figure out how to fix. But there was a massive gift in what I ran into, because two massive gifts, actually. I reached a point where I was so frustrated with the dynamics and my inability to move beyond them or fix them or make it better in some way. And I really care about doing great work. So I take on a lot of stress, especially stress for my grantees, trying to protect them from the internal dynamics and changes. I reached a point where I was hugely stressed. I knew something was going to give, and I didn't want that to be me. So I did two things. I started meditating, which is something that I had been wanting to try. And I laugh about it now. When I first began meditating, I couldn't focus on my breath for more than a second. But very quickly, I began to see the impacts of a meditation practice. The other thing I did is I had been reading a lot about personal development and self-help, trying to figure out how to address these challenges that I was grappling with. And I hired a coach that I heard Wayne Dyer recommend on a podcast.
Oh, wow.
And I got to tell you, working with her was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, because at that point, Tammy, I had developed myself incredibly intellectually, but as a result, I was largely living in my head. And the work with this coach, her name's Ellen White. She's based in Canada. Highly recommend her. I still, once a year or so, she and I will have a check-in call. So we're still in touch. But it was hard work, because she helped me figure out how to move from my head to my heart and to get in touch with what I really wanted, who I really am, and what I now call my inner guidance system. You write about this in your book as well. You talk about intuition.
Oh, yeah.
And she really taught me the power of paying attention to what I'm feeling, to interpreting that and not pushing it away, and paying attention particularly to what am I excited about, because that is the signal for what's calling us forward. And the combination of that work and the meditation enabled me to come back into myself, get clear. And I actually made an internal move at the foundation before I made an external move.
Oh, okay.
Final external move was a function of realizing I was going to be happier, more creative, and more impactful outside of the foundation. And the work with Ellen had been powerful. This happens for a lot of people when they encounter coaching. They realize the power of coaching. And for me, I realized two things. It was personally hugely impactful to me, but it made me think, what if more people had access to this kind of support at a much earlier stage in their careers and lives? Imagine the impact that could have on the world. It also made me start to explore, how do I integrate and incorporate coaching into my own work? Over the years, as I've studied coaching and become a coach myself, I've realized I was always a coach. It was always a DNA. I just didn't know.
I love the fact that throughout your career, all the experiences you've had, you always took a moment to reflect, even when things were really not feeling great to you. You always stopped and looked and said, what am I learning from this? Your curiosity has really been a thread through all of this.
That's a powerful insight. Yeah, it is. Learning is one of my core things. I have to be learning. There's no option not to be learning. You're right. Curiosity is a big part of that. I used to get told off for my curiosity when I was a little girl, as you can imagine it.
Because as a little girl, when you think about your upbringing, you're supposed to pick a lane and stay in it, right? And curiosity is not really part of that equation as much, because it's like you're either a doctor, an engineer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Learning and growth are really key for me, and then impact. And it's funny because
Yeah.
this is one of the things that I've had to consciously reverse in my order of priorities of things that are important to me in the work that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Learning and growth has been a driver for the longest part of my life. And actually, relatively recently, I've made a conscious switch to say, I've got to switch and have impact be the first driver. Because this is a danger for coaches, as I'm sure you'll be aware of. We love to learn. We could spend all our time learning and not enough actually just getting out there, doing the work and having the impact.
Yeah.
So I'm making a conscious shift to rebalance that and have impact drive, because the learning is always going to be there. The impact needs to take precedence.
Yeah.
Now.
Oh, yes, this is very relatable what you're talking about.
Experience.
Take us forward. So you made the decision. Oh, I want to point out also to the audience that you made an internal move at Gates first. So you knew something wasn't feeling right. And rather than just saying, I'm out of here, you made an internal move, which I think sometimes people don't always look towards that. Sometimes they do, but they don't always see what's possible. And I think sometimes it's a good step to take, if you can, to make some kind of internal move first to see if that brings about some satisfaction or meaning for you, and then to see what's next. So, but obviously that internal move was just that. And then you went external. So where did you go from Seattle?
Yeah. So actually I stayed in Seattle initially because I loved it. It's funny, leaving the Gates Foundation, I began to love Seattle even more because suddenly I had more time to root in the community and get to know people outside of my work. Everything multiplied massively. So I loved it. I started teaching at a couple of business schools in Seattle. One was the University of Washington's Business School, but the one that I most loved was Bainbridge Graduate Institute, which was the first business school dedicated to sustainability. They were trying to do something different, and there was a community ethos baked into the school. It was just a joy to teach there and to be rooted in community and to be surrounded by these entrepreneurial, innovative types that wanted to make a difference in the world, but were at that earlier stage in their career. I'm still in touch with many of the students that I taught.
How nice.
Yeah. And they've gone on to do some incredible things.
Talk about impact, right?
Yeah. Oh, teaching is a huge way to have an impact.
Yeah. So you stuck around in Seattle and you were teaching. How long did you do that for?
So the teaching I did pretty much for the rest of the time that I was in Seattle. I do 1 or 2 courses each year. Outside of the teaching, I set up a small consulting practice. I really wanted to do consulting differently because I was so frustrated with the amounts of money that gets spent on consultants, especially in the social impact, the health development space, as you know. And it's the consultants that learn, right? It's the consultants that grow and develop, not the people we're trying to help. And so I had this idea of what I called a consulting plus model. So consulting plus capacity building plus coaching, all baked in, so that any person I touched, or directly or possibly even indirectly, there would be some lasting impact. Challenge, however, Tammy, great ambition. I didn't know how to sell it. So that was tricky. And of course, at that time, people weren't willing to invest in the capacity building and the coaching side in the way they are now.
Yeah.
It's a little ahead of my time in some regards, but it set the stage for what I wanted to do and gave me lots of opportunities to start exploring, learning, playing with it. And that's also how I ended up doing some work with a lot of social entrepreneurs in Seattle. I collaborated with Brian Howe, who started Hub Impact in Seattle, which is a large co-working space dedicated to social entrepreneurs. And he, myself, and the founder of Fledge, a guy called Looney Limes, we ran the first startup weekend for social entrepreneurs ever. The three of us ran out of this Hub Seattle that Brian was founding. And it was a phenomenal experience because it was a chance to bring so much of what I love to do, consulting, facilitating, supporting entrepreneurs, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship together in this really fun but collaborative way. And what I realized, though, through those kinds of experiences is that the things that I really wanted to be doing that excited me, I was sort of doing paid consulting work to subsidize that.
Sure.
And kind of have my little fledgling team grow. And I very quickly realized, okay, something's awry here. I don't want to be building a consulting firm, and I don't want to get into this cycle of having to find work to support a team and stuff.
Right.
And so actually, in some ways, I think life was ahead of me at this point because I didn't have a green card, so I couldn't stay in the US without a visa. And
Oh,
I convinced the US government basically to give me an entrepreneurial visa. I mean, I was too impact oriented and not jobs creation enough, I think, for it.
Mm.
But I ended up realizing, okay, this is a dead end in terms of, it doesn't make sense for me to keep spending time, money, and energy trying to fight this battle. And so I came back reluctantly to the UK, but in hindsight, I think it was absolutely the right thing for me for a variety of ways. Because it also allowed me to sort of shift gears. I could wind down my small consulting firm, but start up in the UK as more of a solopreneur, really, without having to worry about staff salaries and supporting a team. And it also meant I could be more creative, adaptable, and flexible based on the
right.
opportunities and give myself the time and space I needed to develop my own thinking and my own idea.
And when did you do that?
That was about 12 or 13 years ago.
So you've been in the UK since then, and you've remained a solopreneur, if I'm getting that correct, right? And built this consulting practice, coaching practice, and working with a variety of people. Tell us about that.
Sure. Some of my favorite work is where the consulting and the coaching come together. One of the projects I was involved in was immediately when I came back with people that I'd worked with in Kenya. We were basically doing NHS transformation work using tools and techniques that involve coaching, basic management, multi-stakeholder groups to drive innovation and change. But using these techniques that we'd really refined in Africa, applying them in the context of the NHS. And there was a big coaching component in it. So that kind of thing for me is fun. Driving change and transformation in the world through this mix of strategic thinking, creativity, innovation, and coaching. And just before the pandemic, Tammy, I moved to Cornwall and I took a bit of a career break.
Oh.
Because I wanted to write and shift gears. And I knew the work in me needed the time and the space to do that. And then just before the pandemic started, I restarted my coaching practice. And I went all in on coaching for a little while because I really wanted to grow and develop mastery in my coaching practice. I'm now, over the last couple of years, I've sort of been slowly inquiring into, okay, I'm loving the coaching and I'm really privileged to work with some extraordinary leaders who have bold visions for change in the world or have something that they want to bring into the world and think that they can change the world in some meaningful way with the humility to know that they've got to work on themselves first, right? That's a lot of change. The other thing that I'm finding is that my clients often have what I call a spiritual or a contemplative edge.
Yes.
And help them step into a whole new level
of
leading and driving change in the world. And what my practice is currently evolving into, it's back to where I wanted it to be when I left the Gates Foundation, which is finding that some of those clients and some of the things that are exciting me are how do you take the same core approaches that I do around purpose, transformational work, leadership, and strategy, not just from the individual leader, but to the team and to the organization. And I'm potentially to systems and countries because I'm really interested in this collective impact piece as well. And the way I'm doing that is through my own work with clients and their organizations, but also in a couple of partnerships as well. So I'm exploring, like a lot of other coaches and consultants, I've been exploring and experimenting with partnerships and collaborations that can help with some of those pieces, because especially as you get into the collective work of organizations, systems, or countries, vital to work with others who have different pieces of the puzzle or skill set.
Yeah. Wow. That is so exciting. And I can imagine someone listening to this thinking, how do you know these people? How do you find them? How do they find you?
Yeah, good question. I mean, a lot of people find me through just having known me in the past. And suddenly, because I'm fairly active on LinkedIn, they'll see something and go, oh, that's what she's doing now. They'll see something and then it could be a month or a year later. They'll say, I saw that post. And ever since then, I've been thinking we should have a chat. So that's often how it happens. Or things like this, they'll hear me on a podcast or see something. It's always about the right timing,
Oh, it's wonderful. So we're gonna list all of your links and ways for people to find you. But what would be the best way for somebody to begin to learn about your work today? Where would they find you?
I would say there's one of two places. Either find me on LinkedIn, because that's currently where I'm most active social media wise. So
Okay.
who I am from my posts there.
Okay.
Really easy to find because you just use my first name and you'll find. And then my website, www.rashmir.net.
And one final question. If you were to give somebody one key piece of advice, whenever I ask people this question, they're like, well, I have two key pieces of advice.
It's not one thing, isn't it?
It's like, I can't give you one. But if you had a key piece of advice to give somebody who is thinking about what's next for them, what would be a key piece of advice as somebody is really trying to mull through and figure out where they're going next?
Yeah, it's a good question. I might cheat along with everyone else and give you two.
That's okay.
So the first one is listen to your own inner voice. Listen for what's calling you forward, because there's always inner and outer signs and signals. And there are parts of you that know what to do. They know what to point you to. You just need to be able to listen and pay attention and follow those threads. It doesn't mean you have to drop your job and immediately follow the threads.
Right.
Let's begin to pay attention, research, think, explore, and keep following the next point of inspiration.
Absolutely.
I think you do this in your work as well.
Oh yeah, this is all, everything you're saying is exactly the inside out approach.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so the second one is related. The second one is related because I do not think that enough people take time off from work. And so the second one is take proper time off, whether it's a month or 3 months or 6 months. Gift yourself if you financially can do it. And if you try and set yourself up so that you can do it. Because what that does is enables you to ground, center, and reflect. It's the letting go that you talked about, Tammy, earlier. Sometimes you need to let go and heal yourself so that you can actually listen to the inner voice and have the courage and the energy and the wherewithal to follow step for you.
I love it. I'm going to leave it on that note. Rashmir, thank you so much for this. Thank you for generously sharing your journey, your story, and all the fascinating things that you've done. I'm excited to see all the things that you're doing going forward. And talk about impact, that you've already made tremendous impact. I can't imagine what you're going to do next, but thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Tammy. Thank you so much for having me on the show and asking such wonderful questions, drawing out the story. I appreciate that. It's been fun.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of my interview with Rashmir Balasubramaniam. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoularloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 255. And while there, you can subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. If you're feeling it, please help me inspire more people to grow their careers by clicking on the Apple Podcasts button right there and leave an honest rating and brief review. Extra reviews and ratings help call attention to the podcast and will help more people. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out. Break through 9 common obstacles and design a career that fulfills you. It's available through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. You can also help sustain this podcast by buying me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, your support is acknowledged and appreciated. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.